are some of the events that happened this week, May 22nd to 28th, in Canadian history. On May 22nd, 1611, the first Jesuits arrived at Port Royal in what is now Nova Scotia. Pierre Biard and Ennemond Massé were the first Jesuits in New France, but they would be driven out of Acadia 2 years later when settlers from Virginia under the English flag attacked. The Jesuits were set adrift in an open boat on the sea. They would be rescued and eventually come back to preach in the Acadian region. We now cross over the Atlantic to London, England, for a very important event in Canadian history. This date also saw the final step for the creation of Canada to happen in 1867. Queen Victoria gave royal assent to the British North America Act, creating the first ever dominion of the British Empire, Canada. While the act was given royal assent on this date, it would not take effect until July 1st. We now fast forward over 100 years to 1987 and go to Vancouver, where on May 22nd, Rick Hansen finished his 26-month-long Man in Motion tour, covering 34 countries in that span. He raised millions of dollars for spinal cord research. On May 23rd, in 1645, the French government would pass an edict that carries through with it ramifications to this very day. They ordered that only Roman Catholic settlers would be allowed to reside in New France. This ended more than 30 years of colonization attempts by Huguenots and Protestants. The Canadian Northwest Mounted Police were established on May 23rd in 1873 by an Act of Parliament. Originally conceived by Sir John A. Macdonald to be a force made up of Métis constables with white superiors, that approach was abandoned in light of the Red River Rebellion in 1870. The force would be deployed in 1874. With this week being the week of the Victoria Day long weekend, it is worth noting that the holiday comes about because of something that happened on May 24th, 1819. Queen Victoria was born in London, England. She would ascend to the throne after the death of William IV in 1837 and would reign until her death on January 22nd, 1901. 16 months after her death, the first Victoria Day was established in Canada on May 24, 1902. The details of the worst E. coli outbreak in Canadian history came to light in the year 2000. A torrential downpour on May 12th had washed bacteria from cattle manure into a poorly planned and poorly maintained well in Walkerton, Ontario. 7 people would die and 2,300 fall ill. An inquiry into the incident blamed the chain of events on 2 officials in the town, as well as spending cuts by the provincial government. The agreement for the construction of the Trans-Canada was reached on May 25, 1950. The highway, which goes from Victoria to St. John's, passes through 9 of the 10 provinces, and at 7,476 kilometers long, it is the 3rd longest national highway in the world. On the same date in 1972, the Manitoba Court of Appeal ruled that a provincial law passed nearly 90 years earlier was invalid. That law forbade French in the legislature, courts, and schools, despite the Manitoba Act of 1870 guaranteeing those language rights. 10 years later, the federal budget was leaked the day before it was to be released. Doug Small, a reporter for Global TV, read highlights of the budget on the air after being provided with the documents by a clerk for the Department of National Defense. Prime Minister Brian Mulroney called the leak a criminal act, but charges against Small were dismissed the following year. Now to May 26th. In 1874, the Dominion Elections Act became law. It introduced voting by secret ballot, as well as simultaneous elections. Before this came into effect, nomination was done in public, voting was open and done orally, and the elections would happen over the course of several weeks. 13 years later, the main line of the Canadian Pacific Railway was opened for passenger traffic. While the trains had been running from Montreal to Vancouver for roughly 18 months, passengers were now able to make the same 4,700-kilometer trek. A man who would go on to fame in film and television in the 1950s was born on the Six Nation Reserves near Brantford on May 26, 1919. Harold J. Smith, who used the stage name Jay Silverheels, played Tonto on The Lone Ranger on TV and the big screen. He was also an accomplished boxer and lacrosse player. On May 27, 1534, Jacques Cartier explored the Strait of Belle Isle. On this voyage, he would also explore the southern shore of Labrador, the Gaspé Peninsula, the north shore coastlines of St. Lawrence, Prince Edward Island, and Anticosti Island. He also encountered indigenous people on the north side of Chaleur Bay, more than likely Mi'kmaq. His voyage also saw him plant a cross to claim the land for France, and he kidnapped the 2 sons of the Iroquois chief Donnacona. He would return with those sons the following year. The day is also marked by the announcement that Major League Baseball would be coming to Canada in 1968. Montreal was awarded a National League franchise. The Expos began play the following season. The team did end up moving to Washington for the start of the 2005 season. However, not once did Montreal ever win the World Series. The closest they came was when a strike was called in 1994 when they were the #1 team in Major League Baseball. A legend in hockey, Maurice Richard, passed away on May 26, 2000. He's well known for his time with the Montreal Canadiens. He was known as the Rocket and was the first player to score 50 goals in 50 games in NHL history. May 28th is the date in 1927 when the Canadian Old Age Pension Plan was approved by Parliament. Eligibility for the plan was extremely limited. British subjects who were 70 or older and had lived in Canada for 20 years. It was only for those who earned less than $365 a year, and status First Nations were excluded. The Dion quintuplets would be born in 1934 in Colander, Ontario. They were the first quintuplets to survive more than a few days. They were taken by the Ontario government and placed in a specially built hospital. Their mother fought for 9 years to regain custody. And in 1998, 3 surviving sisters and their families received compensation from the Ontario government for the mistreatment during their childhood. May 28, 1995, saw Jacques Villeneuve becoming the first Canadian to ever win the Indianapolis 500. And in 2000, the remains of an unknown Canadian soldier were interred at the National War Memorial in Ottawa after being returned to the country from Vimy Ridge, France. That is a look at this week in Canadian history. Be sure to subscribe as we keep bringing you more on Canadian history, including our weekly podcast here on YouTube. And leave a comment telling us what event of the past week you think is something that we missed.